The cry in the dark. It was just past midnight when the piercing sound of a woman's scream shattered the stillness of the neighborhood. Officer Liam Carter had just finished his late-night coffee run when his radio crackled to life, dispatch relaying a frantic 911 call. 911, what's your emergency? Through the receiver came the breathless, almost hysterical voice of a woman. My son is gone. He's gone. Someone took my baby. The call was enough to send adrenaline coursing through Liam's veins. He barely registered the rest of the details as he hit the siren and raced toward the address provided. His years on the force had taught him that the first hours of a missing child case were crucial, and every second lost could spell disaster. The Ortiz residence was a modest suburban home, its exterior neat and unassuming, but the chaos inside told a different story. The door flew open before Liam could even knock, and a young woman stumbled out, clutching a crumpled baby blanket to her chest. He's gone, she cried, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Matteo is gone. Liam steadied her, his firm grip on her shoulders grounding her. Ma'am, I'm Officer Carter. I'm here to help. Please, tell me exactly what happened. Her words tumbled out in fragmented bursts. I put him to bed, around 8. Checked on him later. Everything was fine. But just now, I went back, and he's gone. She collapsed into sobs, the blanket falling to the ground. Is anyone else in the house? Liam asked, his voice calm despite the rising tension. My husband, she whispered, barely audible. Gabriel. He's inside, looking for him. Liam gestured for backup to approach as he stepped into the house. The living room was pristine, almost unnaturally so. A collection of toys was neatly arranged in a corner, and family photos lined the walls. There was no sign of forced entry, no overturned furniture or broken glass, nothing to suggest a struggle. Gabriel Ortiz was in the nursery when Liam found him, standing over an empty crib. The man's face was ashen, his hands gripping the edge of the crib so tightly that his knuckles were white. He looked up as Liam entered, his eyes hollow. I didn't hear anything, Gabriel stammered. We were asleep. And then he gestured helplessly toward the hallway. She woke me up, screaming that he was gone. The nursery itself was unnervingly quiet. A mobile hung motionless above the crib, its cheerful animal figures mocking the anguish in the room. Liam's eyes darted to the open window on the far side. The latch was unhooked, and the curtain swayed gently in the night breeze. Did either of you leave this window open? Liam asked, his voice sharp now. Gabriel shook his head. No, we always keep it locked. A deeper dread began to settle over Liam. He radioed for additional units and a forensics team. Time was of the essence, and they couldn't afford to miss even the smallest clue. The first clues. The house became a hive of activity as officers and investigators combed through every room. Gabriel and Victoria sat on the couch, their anguish palpable. Liam stayed close, asking questions and jotting down notes. What time did you last check on Matteo? He asked. Victoria hesitated, her voice trembling. Around 11. He was sleeping peacefully. I didn't hear anything unusual. And you, Mr. Ortiz? Gabriel glanced at his wife before answering. I went to bed around 10. I was asleep until she woke me up. Any signs of trouble earlier in the day? Anyone lingering around the house? Strange cars in the neighborhood? They both shook their heads. No, Victoria said. It was a normal day. The search intensified as officers canvassed the area, speaking to neighbors and scouring nearby yards. The forensics team focused on the nursery, dusting for prints and analyzing the open window. But the more they searched, the clearer it became that this wasn't a simple case of a child wandering off. Hours passed with no sign of Matteo. Then, just as the sun began to rise, a chilling development emerged. A sinister call. Victoria's phone rang, startling her out of a restless stupor. Her hands trembled as she answered, putting the call on speaker for Liam to hear. "Hello," she whispered. The voice on the other end was deep and distorted, as if filtered through a voice modulator. "We have your son. If you want to see him again, you'll bring $50,000 to the old mill on Harper Road. No police. You have 24 hours." The line went dead before Victoria could respond. The room fell silent, the weight of the threat hanging in the air. Liam sprang into action, relaying the details to his team. The Ortiz family was quickly escorted to the precinct for their safety, and a plan was set in motion to trace the call and prepare for a potential drop. But as the day wore on, the investigation took a darker turn. Forensic analysis revealed footprints outside the nursery window, adult-sized sneakers leading away from the house, but stopping abruptly near the street. No tire tracks, no evidence of a vehicle. It was as if the intruder had vanished into thin air. The ransom call, when traced, led to a burner phone purchased days earlier at a gas station across town. Surveillance footage showed a figure in a hoodie buying the phone, but their face was obscured. The clues were maddeningly elusive, and Liam's gut told him there was more to this case than met the eye. Threads of doubt. The Ortiz family was safely escorted to a secure location for their protection, while the investigation continued. Detective Liam Carter and his partner, Officer Sarah Doyle, huddled in the precinct's makeshift command center, sifting through the growing mountain of evidence. The ransom call, the footprints, the missing child, it all felt like pieces from separate puzzles, forcing them to connect dots that refused to align. Liam leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This case isn't sitting right with me. The ransom demand feels staged. The footprints just stop. And that call, it felt scripted, like someone reading a bad thriller." Sarah nodded, pulling up surveillance footage on her laptop. If this was about money, why leave the house so pristine? No signs of struggle, no note left behind. Even the window latch, open, but not broken. It's almost like they wanted us to focus on the window. Liam stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Exactly. Whoever did this wanted us to think it was an outsider. But I'm not convinced. What about the neighbors? Did anyone hear or see anything unusual? Sarah flipped through her notes. Not much. The only solid lead is Mrs. Callahan, the neighbor 2 doors down. She said she heard shouting around 10:30, a woman's voice, but she couldn't make out the words. Everyone else claims it was a quiet night. Liam frowned. Shouting at 10:30. That doesn't fit Victoria's timeline. She said she checked on Matteo at 11, and everything was fine, and Gabriel was supposedly asleep by 10. Could the shouting have been unrelated? Sarah asked. Maybe, Liam admitted, but it's worth digging into. Let's pay Mrs. Callahan another visit. A neighbor's perspective. The sun hummed low in the sky as Liam and Sarah approached the Callahan residence. The elderly woman greeted them at the door, her face etched with concern. "Detectives, I hoped you'd come back," she said, motioning them inside. Her living room smelled faintly of lavender and was meticulously tidy, a sharp contrast to the chaos consuming the Ortiz family. "Mrs. Callahan, thank you for speaking with us again," Liam began. "We wanted to clarify a few details about what you heard the night Matteo went missing." She settled into her armchair, wringing her hands. It was late, around 10:30, maybe a little after. I was about to turn off the TV when I heard shouting coming from the Ortiz house. It sounded like Victoria, but it didn't sound right. Liam tilted his head. "What do you mean by didn't sound right?" Mrs. Callahan hesitated. Her voice was angry, but also desperate, like she was pleading with someone. It only lasted a minute or two, and then it went quiet. "Did you hear anything else? Footsteps, a car, anything unusual?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Callahan shook her head. "No, just the shouting. I thought about calling them to check, but I didn't want to intrude. Now I wish I had." Liam exchanged a glance with Sarah. "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan. You've been very helpful." As they left the house, Sarah voiced what they were both thinking. If Mrs. Callahan's timeline is accurate, Victoria's story doesn't add up. And if she was arguing with someone, who was it? Liam added. Gabriel. Someone else in the house. Fractures in the story. Back at the precinct, Liam and Sarah re-examined the Ortiz family statements. The inconsistencies were glaring now, particularly in Victoria's version of events. She's specific about the times, Liam said, tapping a pen against his notebook. Too specific. Most people wouldn't remember exact times during a chaotic night like that. Sarah nodded, and Gabriel's behavior isn't helping. He's evasive, defensive. The man's hiding something. They decided to bring Victoria in for another round of questioning. This time, Liam's approach was more direct. Mrs. Ortiz, he began as she sat across from him in the interrogation room, we're trying to fill in some gaps in the timeline. You said you checked on Mateo around 11, and everything was fine. Victoria nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. That's correct. And you didn't hear anything unusual? No noises, no signs of a struggle? Liam pressed. No, she said, her voice trembling. Everything was normal. Liam leaned forward, his tone soft but firm. Mrs. Ortiz, a neighbor reported hearing shouting from your house around 10:30 that night. Can you explain that? Victoria's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. No, that's not true. There wasn't any shouting. I was with Mateo, putting him to bed. Are you sure? Liam asked, his gaze unwavering. Because if there was an argument, it's important we know. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. I don't remember. Maybe I raised my voice, but I was just stressed. Mateo was fussy, and Gabriel wasn't helping, but it wasn't anything serious. Liam noted her hesitation but didn't press further, for now. A glimmer of truth. Meanwhile, Sarah delved into Gabriel's financial records. What she uncovered was damning. Overdue mortgage payments, a failing business, and a $50,000 cash withdrawal 2 days before Mateo's disappearance, the exact amount demanded in the ransom call. Liam, Sarah said, bursting into his office. You need to see this. Liam scanned the documents, his jaw tightening. This isn't just financial trouble. This is desperation. And that withdrawal, that's not a coincidence. They brought Gabriel in next, confronting him with the evidence. Mr. Ortiz, Liam said, laying the financial records on the table, can you explain this $50,000 withdrawal? Gabriel's face darkened, and he shifted uncomfortably. It was for business expenses, payroll. Convenient timing, Liam replied. It's the exact amount demanded in the ransom call. Gabriel's composure cracked. I don't know what you're implying, but I didn't take Mateo. I'd never hurt my son. Then why didn't you mention this earlier? Sarah pressed. If you're innocent, transparency would help your case. Gabriel's silence was telling, an ominous discovery. While the interrogation unfolded, the forensic team made a breakthrough. They had analyzed the footprints outside the nursery window and found traces of mud unique to a park several miles away. Fairview Park, a sprawling area known for its dense woods and isolated trails. Why would the intruder take Mateo there? Sarah wondered aloud as they reviewed the report. Liam's gut told him this was no random location. It's remote, but not so far that it's completely hidden, almost like they wanted the body to be found. The team dispatched a search unit to Fairview Park. Hours later, a grim discovery confirmed Liam's fears. Hidden beneath a cluster of bushes, they found a baby blanket, identical to the one Victoria had described as Mateo's favorite. But Mateo himself was nowhere to be found. Fractured facades. The discovery at Fairview Park added a chilling layer to the case. The blanket was sent for analysis, and the search for Mateo intensified. Meanwhile, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that the answers lay within the Ortiz household. Back at the precinct, he confronted Victoria and Gabriel together. Their reactions to the latest discovery would be telling. Mrs. Ortiz, Mr. Ortiz, Liam began, placing the photo of the blanket on the table. We found this in Fairview Park. Does it look familiar? Victoria gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. That's Mateo's. That's his blanket. Gabriel's face, however, remained stoic, his eyes flicking briefly to Victoria before settling on the photo. What does this mean? Did you find him? Not yet, Liam said, his tone sharp. But this blanket suggests someone wanted us to think he'd been taken there. The question is, why? Victoria broke into sobs. But Liam noticed Gabriel's hand twitch, a subtle but telling sign of discomfort. Someone in this room knows more than they're saying, Liam said, his voice cutting through the tension. And I'm going to find out who. Secrets beneath the surface. Detective Liam Carter returned to his office, his thoughts clouded by the mounting inconsistencies in the Ortiz case. The discovery of Mateo's blanket at Fairview Park was a breakthrough, but it raised more questions than answers. Why had the blanket been left there? Was it a decoy to throw the police off, or a grim marker of something far worse? Liam spread the evidence photos across his desk, each piece a fragment of a puzzle that refused to come together. His partner, Sarah Doyle, entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set one down in front of him, her expression grim. Lab results are back on the blanket, she said, sitting across from him. It's Mateo's. No doubt about it. And DNA? Liam asked, his voice heavy with anticipation. Sarah handed him the report. Traces of Mateo's saliva and hair. But here's the kicker. There are faint impressions of someone else's DNA along the edges. Preliminary analysis suggests Gabriel's, but the sample's too degraded to confirm without further testing. Liam leaned back, exhaling sharply. Gabriel's DNA on the blanket, $50,000 in cash withdrawn before the ransom call, and an unaccounted-for trip during the critical hours. It's all pointing at him, but it feels too neat. Sarah nodded, her brow furrowed. It's like someone wants us to focus on him. But who? And why? Before Liam could respond, his phone buzzed on the desk. The screen flashed with the name of Officer Kyle Henson, who was stationed with the search team at Fairview Park. We found something, Kyle said, his voice tense. It's not the boy, but it's big. You need to come down here. The shadows of Fairview Park. Fairview Park was eerily quiet as Liam and Sarah arrived at the scene. Yellow tape cordoned off an area near a dense cluster of trees, where officers and forensic technicians moved methodically. Kyle met them at the perimeter, his face pale. What have you got? Liam asked. Kyle led them toward the taped-off area, a shallow grave. We were combing through the area around the blanket when one of the dogs picked up a scent. We started digging and found this. The shallow grave was a grim sight. Inside, they found an old, dirt-stained teddy bear, a child's shoe, and a torn piece of fabric. The items were meticulously bagged and tagged by the forensic team, but there was no sign of Mateo. This isn't random, Sarah said, staring at the items. Someone left these here deliberately. Liam's gaze lingered on the teddy bear. It's a breadcrumb trail. Whoever did this is playing games, leading us somewhere, or away from somewhere else. He turned to Dana Fields, the lead forensic technician. I need every piece of evidence analyzed. Fingerprints, DNA, soil samples, everything. Someone's trying to send a message, and I want to know what it is. The family's fractured reality. Back at the precinct, Victoria and Gabriel Ortiz were brought in for further questioning. The tension between them was palpable, their once united front now visibly cracking. Victoria sat rigid in her chair, her tear-streaked face etched with anger and suspicion. Gabriel, on the other hand, seemed increasingly withdrawn, his eyes avoiding hers. Mr. Ortiz, Liam began, placing a photo of the blanket on the table. This was found at Fairview Park. Your DNA was on it. Care to explain how it got there? Gabriel's jaw tightened, and he shook his head. I don't know. I haven't been to that park in years. Really? Sarah interjected, her tone sharp. Because your car was caught on surveillance near the park entrance the night Matteo disappeared. That doesn't sound like years. Gabriel's composure faltered. I was driving around trying to clear my head. I didn't go into the park. Then how do you explain this? Liam pressed, sliding another photo across the table, this one of the shoe and fabric found in the grave. Gabriel's face went pale, and his hands trembled. I don't know. I don't know how any of this happened. Liam turned his attention to Victoria, whose gaze was fixed on Gabriel with a mix of rage and heartbreak. Mrs. Ortiz, did you know about your husband's financial troubles? The $50,000 cash withdrawal. Victoria blinked, caught off guard. What? No, he didn't tell me. And the sedatives prescribed to you, Sarah added. The ones found in Matteo's system. Victoria's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. I didn't give him anything. I would never. Her voice broke into a sob. Liam leaned forward, his tone softening. Victoria, we're not accusing you. But someone in this house had access to those sedatives. And we need to know who. I don't know, she cried, her voice raw. I don't know what's happening anymore. A new thread. As the investigation progressed, Sarah uncovered another lead. A series of text messages on Gabriel's phone that had been deleted but were recovered by the tech team. The messages were sent to an unknown number in the days leading up to Matteo's disappearance. Gabriel, I can't take this anymore. Unknown number. Just stick to the plan. It'll all be over soon. Liam stared at the messages, his gut churning. Whoever this is, they're more involved than we thought. Can we trace the number? Sarah shook her head. Burner phone. But I'm working on cross-referencing purchase records in the area. Good, Liam said, because this changes everything. Gabriel wasn't acting alone. The nanny's revelation. As suspicion shifted, Liam and Sarah turned their attention to Elena Walker, the Ortiz family's live-in nanny. Her initial interviews had been straightforward, but something about her responses had stuck with Liam, particularly her claim of being in her room the entire night. Elena, Liam began during her follow-up interview. We need to clarify your movements the night Matteo disappeared. Are you certain you didn't leave your room at any point? Her face remained calm, but her hands fidgeted in her lap. I already told you, I didn't hear or see anything. Funny, Sarah said, setting a photo of the blanket on the table. Because we found this in a park Matteo's never been to. And the footprints near the scene match a pair of sneakers found in your room. Elena's calm facade cracked, and she looked away. I didn't take him, she whispered. Then tell us what you know. Liam pressed. Tears welled in her eyes. I just wanted to help. Matteo was crying so much, and Victoria, she was so overwhelmed. I thought if I took him for a drive, let him sleep, it would calm him down. And the park? Sarah asked, her voice tight. Elena hesitated, her shoulders trembling. I went there to clear my head, but I swear he was fine when I left him in the car. When I came back, he was gone, closing the net. Elena's confession added a new layer to the case, but Liam wasn't convinced she was telling the full story. The messages on Gabriel's phone, the planted evidence in the park, and the sedatives in Matteo's system all pointed to a deeper conspiracy. Someone's orchestrating this, Liam said to Sarah as they reviewed the evidence board. And they're using everyone. Victoria, Gabriel, Elena, as pawns. Then the question is, Sarah replied, her eyes narrowing, who's holding the strings? The ties that bind. The Ortiz case had evolved into a labyrinth of secrets, each turn more twisted than the last. Detective Liam Carter stood before the evidence board in the precinct's war room, his eyes scanning the web of connections. Victoria's strained mental state, Gabriel's financial troubles, Elena's suspicious behavior, and now the mysterious text messages, all threads of a larger, more sinister narrative. Yet the heart of it all remained agonizingly out of reach. Where was Matteo? "We're close," Liam muttered to his partner, Sarah Doyle, who was seated across the room poring over reports. "I can feel it, but every time we pull on a thread, it feels like it's tied to another dozen knots." Sarah glanced up, exhaustion etched into her features. "And someone's making sure we never get to untangle them all. The question is, who's behind it?" The mysterious number. The burner phone used to send the cryptic messages to Gabriel had been traced back to a small convenience store on the edge of town. Surveillance footage revealed a figure in a dark hoodie purchasing the phone with cash, but their face was obscured. Despite the dead end, the tech team managed to recover one last piece of data. The burner phone had been used to call Elena Walker multiple times in the weeks leading up to Matteo's disappearance. "Elena's not just a bystander," Sarah said as she and Liam reviewed the findings. "She's tied to this, whether she wants to admit it or not." Liam nodded grimly. "She admitted taking Matteo to the park, but why lie about the phone calls? She's hiding something." They brought Elena back to the precinct for questioning. This time, Liam's approach was blunt. "Elena, we've traced the burner phone used to send those messages to Gabriel. It was also used to call you, multiple times. Care to explain?" he asked, sliding the phone records across the table. Elena's eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. I don't know who that is." Liam leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Don't lie to me. This is your chance to come clean. If you're protecting someone, now's the time to speak up." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, and her composure cracked. "It was him," she whispered. "Gabriel. He called me." "Gabriel?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowing. "Why would he call you on a burner phone?" Elena hesitated, her hands trembling. "He said he needed my help, that Victoria was struggling, and that Matteo needed to be taken somewhere safe. He made it sound like she might hurt him." Liam and Sarah exchanged a glance, the pieces beginning to shift. "And you believed him?" Liam pressed. "I didn't know what to believe." Elena cried. "I thought I was helping. He asked me to take Matteo for a few hours, just until he could figure things out. But when I went back to the car, Matteo was gone. I swear, I don't know what happened after that." Gabriel's last lie. Armed with Elena's testimony, Liam and Sarah brought Gabriel back in for questioning. This time, there was no pretense of sympathy. "Gabriel," Liam began, dropping a thick file onto the table. "We've got you. The burner phone, the messages to Elena, the staged ransom call. It's all pointing at you." Gabriel's face hardened, but he said nothing. "You told Elena to take Matteo because you were worried about Victoria," Sarah said, her tone sharp. "But that's not the whole story, is it? You were the one struggling, not her. You were drowning in debt, your marriage was falling apart, and Matteo became the scapegoat." Gabriel's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't we?" Liam said, leaning forward. "You made Elena believe she was saving Matteo. But when she left him in the car, you were the one who took him. You wanted us to think he'd been kidnapped, that this was all about ransom money. But it wasn't." "So what was it about?" Gabriel's mask of defiance slipped, and his shoulders sagged. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered. "What didn't you mean, Gabriel?" Liam pressed. "Killing your son, or covering it up?" Gabriel's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "I didn't kill him. I was trying to protect him." "Protect him from what?" Sarah demanded. Gabriel hesitated, his gaze darting between Liam and Sarah. Victoria, she wasn't okay. She was snapping at him, losing her temper. "I thought if I could get him out of the house, just for a little while, it would calm her down. But then," his voice broke, "then things spiraled out of control." A shocking discovery. While Gabriel's confession added more layers to the case, it still didn't explain Matteo's whereabouts. The focus shifted back to Fairview Park, where the forensic team continued their search. Late one evening, Dana Fields, the lead technician, called Liam with an update. "We found something buried deeper in the same area as the blanket," Dana said, her voice taut. You need to see this." Liam and Sarah rushed to the park, where Dana led them to a newly uncovered site. Beneath the disturbed soil was a small wooden box. Inside, they found Matteo's favorite toy car and a handwritten note. "I'm sorry. This was the only way." The note was bagged and sent for analysis, but the handwriting matched Gabriel's. "He's playing games," Sarah said, her frustration evident. "He's taunting us." "No," Liam said, staring at the note. "This isn't taunting. It's guilt." The pieces fall together. Back at the precinct, Liam confronted Gabriel with the note. "This is your handwriting," Liam said, placing the photo of the note in front of him. "What were you apologizing for, Gabriel?" Gabriel's face crumpled, and he buried his head in his hands. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," he sobbed. "I just wanted to fix things." "Fix things how?" Liam demanded. "By staging a kidnapping. By planting evidence." Gabriel shook his head. "I thought if I made it look like he'd been taken, it would buy me time. But when Alina left him in the car, I went to check on him, and he wasn't breathing. I panicked. I thought Victoria would blame me, So you buried his toys and blanket in the park to make it look like a kidnapping," Sarah finished, her voice cold. Gabriel nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know what else to do." The final revelation. Gabriel's confession seemed to tie up the case, but Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Late that night, he sat alone in the precinct, staring at the evidence board. His mind replayed every detail of the case, every lie, every half-truth. And then it hit him. The sedatives, the timeline, the burner phone. They all pointed to someone else, someone who had been orchestrating the chaos from behind the scenes. "Alina," Liam muttered, his eyes narrowing. "She's the key," the puppeteer revealed. Detective Liam Carter sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the evidence board like it was a personal nemesis. Despite Gabriel's confession, the case still felt incomplete. The sedatives in Matteo's system, the meticulously staged evidence, and the burner phone all pointed to a level of calculation far beyond a father panicking over a tragic mistake. "Alina," Liam muttered under his breath, his thoughts churning. She had woven herself into the Ortiz family's life, her role as the nanny granting her access to their home and trust. But her timeline didn't hold, her connection to Gabriel was undeniable, and her actions pointed to something far more sinister. "Sarah," Liam called out, motioning his partner into the room. "We're missing something big. Alina's story doesn't add up. She's tied to Gabriel, but what if she's the one pulling the strings?" Sarah frowned, crossing her arms. "You think she orchestrated this? Why?" "That's what we're going to find out," Liam said, grabbing his coat. "Let's bring her in." The web tightens. Alina Walker's demeanor had shifted noticeably since her initial interviews. When Liam and Sarah escorted her into the interrogation room, her usual calm composure was replaced by a guarded, almost defiant stance. She sat across from them, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Alina," Liam began, his tone firm but measured, "we need to go over your story again. There are too many inconsistencies for us to ignore." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I've told you everything. I was just trying to help." "Help," Sarah interjected, sliding a photo of the burner phone across the table. "You call this helping? You were in communication with Gabriel for weeks, using an untraceable phone. You knew he was struggling, and yet you claim you were just helping. Start talking." Alina's eyes flicked to the photo, her jaw tightening. "Gabriel reached out to me because he didn't know who else to turn to. He thought Victoria might hurt Matteo. Or maybe you convinced him of that," Liam said sharply. You had access to the house, to Matteo, to everything. You're at the center of all of this, Elena. The only question is why. She looked up at Liam then, her eyes glinting with something between defiance and despair. You think I planned this? You think I'd wanted this to happen? That's exactly what I think, Liam said, leaning forward. You manipulated Gabriel, you staged the evidence, and you tried to shift the blame. But it all comes back to you. For a moment, Elena was silent, her gaze locked on Liam. Then she leaned back in her chair and let out a bitter laugh. You really don't see it, do you? The confession. Liam and Sarah exchanged a tense glance as Elena's demeanor shifted. The guarded nanny was gone, replaced by someone who seemed almost triumphant. You're right, Elena said, her voice low but steady. I planned everything, but not for the reasons you think. Enlighten us, Liam said coldly. Elena's eyes narrowed. Do you know what it's like to raise someone else's child? To spend every waking moment loving and caring for them, only to be treated like you're invisible. Victoria didn't deserve Matteo. She was always snapping at him, ignoring him, leaving me to pick up the pieces. And Gabriel? He was so consumed with his failing business that he didn't even see what was happening under his own roof. So you decided to take matters into your own hands, Sarah said, her voice icy. You drugged Matteo, didn't you? Elena smirked, her defiance growing. I didn't have to. Victoria's prescription was right there, and Gabriel was already unraveling. All I had to do was push him a little. Make him think he was protecting Matteo. It wasn't hard. Liam's stomach turned. And when Gabriel panicked and took Matteo to the park, I followed him, Elena said simply. I waited until he left Matteo in the car, and then I took him. Gabriel was so convinced he was doing the right thing, he didn't even question it. Where's Matteo? Liam demanded, his voice rising. What did you do with him? Elena's smirk faltered, and for the first time, a flicker of guilt crossed her face. He's safe, she said quietly. That's all you need to know. The search for Matteo. Elena's cryptic confession set off a chain of events that mobilized every resource at the precinct. Officers combed through her phone records, her bank statements, and her personal life, searching for any clue that might lead them to Matteo. Liam and Sarah spearheaded the investigation, their frustration mounting with every dead end. Elena's refusal to reveal Matteo's location only deepened their resolve. She's enjoying this, Sarah muttered as they pored over a map of the city. She thinks she's in control. But she slipped up, Liam said, his finger tracing a route on the map. She said Matteo's safe. That means she didn't harm him, at least not intentionally. She has to have him somewhere she thinks is secure. The break came when a junior officer found a rental agreement in Elena's name for a storage unit on the outskirts of town. The unit had been rented just days before Matteo's disappearance. Let's go, Liam said, grabbing his coat. The storage unit. The storage facility was a nondescript building on a quiet stretch of road. Liam, Sarah, and a team of officers arrived just after sunset, the air thick with tension. The facility manager unlocked the unit, and the officers entered cautiously. Inside, they found a makeshift nursery, a crib, blankets, bottles, and toys all meticulously arranged. And there, sitting in the crib, was Matteo. The toddler looked up at them with wide, curious eyes, clutching a stuffed animal. Relief washed over the team as Liam gently picked him up, his heart pounding. Matteo was unharmed, though clearly confused. We got him, Liam said into his radio, his voice thick with emotion. He's safe. The fallout. Elena's arrest was swift and decisive. Her confession, combined with the overwhelming evidence, ensured a solid case against her. Gabriel was also charged for his role in the cover-up, though his involvement was largely seen as the result of Elena's manipulation. Victoria, who had been on the brink of collapse throughout the ordeal, broke down in tears when Liam returned Matteo to her. Holding her son tightly, she whispered, "Thank you," over and over. As the case closed, Liam couldn't shake the weight of what had transpired. The Ortiz family had been torn apart, not just by Elena's actions, but by their own fractured dynamics. It was a stark reminder of how easily cracks beneath the surface could grow into devastating chasms. Fractured hearts, final reckoning. The air in the precinct was heavy with a mix of relief and lingering tension. Mateo Ortiz was safe. The toddler had been returned to his mother's arms, unharmed but forever marked by the ordeal. Yet, as the dust settled, Detective Liam Carter knew the case was far from over. While Elena Walker's arrest marked a turning point, the fallout for the Ortiz family and the deeper truths behind the case remained unresolved. Liam sat at his desk, staring at the closed case file with a sense of unease. The pieces had fallen into place, but the picture they painted was one of brokenness, manipulation, and betrayal. He rubbed his temples, haunted by Elena's words during her confession. They didn't deserve him. The Ortiz family in ruins. Victoria Ortiz sat on the couch in the precinct's family room, cradling Mateo as if letting him go would shatter her. She had been inconsolable since learning the full extent of Gabriel's and Elena's betrayals. Her husband had manipulated her, cast doubt on her sanity, and involved their child in a scheme that could have ended in unthinkable tragedy. Gabriel, meanwhile, sat in an interrogation room, his head bowed and hands cuffed. He looked like a man who had lost everything, a father broken by his own choices, a husband who had betrayed the woman he once loved. Liam entered the family room cautiously, his expression softened by empathy. "Mrs. Ortiz, can I speak with you for a moment?" Victoria looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't have anything left to say, Detective," she said hoarsely. "I understand," Liam said gently, pulling up a chair across from her. "But I think it's important for you to know the full story, not just what happened, but why." Victoria's grip on Mateo tightened. "Why? Why did this happen to us? To him?" Liam exhaled, choosing his words carefully. Elena felt excluded. She thought she had more of a claim to Mateo than you did. Gabriel, on the other hand, was drowning, financially, emotionally, and made choices he can't undo. They let their own pain and insecurities consume them, and in doing so, they hurt you and Mateo. Victoria shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I trusted her. I trusted both of them. How do I come back from this?" Liam hesitated, then said quietly, "You start by protecting Mateo. By showing him the love and stability he deserves. That's what matters now." Gabriel's reckoning. In the interrogation room, Gabriel Ortiz sat slumped in his chair, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him. When Liam entered, Gabriel didn't look up. "Gabriel," Liam began, his tone sharp, "you told yourself you were protecting Mateo. But what you did, what you allowed to happen, wasn't protection. It was selfishness." Gabriel's head snapped up, his eyes bloodshot. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't wake up every day knowing I failed him? Failed my family? Then why?" Liam demanded, slamming a hand on the table. "Why didn't you stop? Why involve Elena? Why stage the ransom call? At what point did you think this would end well?" Gabriel's shoulders slumped further. "Because I was desperate. The business was failing. Victoria was slipping away from me. And Mateo. He was the only thing that made sense. But then Elena got into my head. She said Victoria couldn't handle him, that she was going to hurt him. I thought I was saving him." "You weren't saving him," Liam said coldly. "You were making him a pawn in your twisted game. And now your son will grow up knowing his father betrayed him." Gabriel's head dropped into his hands, silent tears soaking the table. For the first time, Liam saw the depth of his regret. But it wasn't enough. The damage was done. Elena's delusion. Elena Walker sat in her holding cell, her expression a chilling mix of calm and defiance. Sarah Doyle stood outside the bars, her arms crossed as she watched Elena pace. You think you've won, Elena said, her voice low but steady. But I saved him. I gave him a chance. Sarah stepped closer, her voice laced with anger. You didn't save him. You stole him. You manipulated a grieving family, put a child in danger. And for what? To prove you were better than his parents. They didn't deserve him, Elena hissed. Victoria ignored him. Gabriel used him. I was the only one who loved him enough to protect him. Sarah shook her head. That's not love, Elena. That's control. And now you'll spend the rest of your life paying for it. Closure or fracture. The weeks following Matteo's return were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional fallout. Gabriel was charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and child endangerment. His once pristine reputation shattered. He accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Elena. Elena, meanwhile, faced a slew of charges, including kidnapping and child endangerment. Her trial was a media spectacle, but her calm demeanor and chilling justifications only deepened the public's disgust. Victoria was left to pick up the pieces. The once perfect image of her family was gone, replaced by a painful reality she was still learning to navigate. But through it all, she found solace in Matteo's resilience. He was too young to understand the betrayal and chaos that had surrounded him, and Victoria vowed to shield him from it as he grew. Liam's reflection. The case left a mark on Liam Carter. In his years as a detective, he had seen the worst humanity had to offer, but the Ortiz case had cut deeper than most. It wasn't just the crime. It was the way love, trust, and desperation had been twisted into something unrecognizable. As he sat in his office one evening, staring at the now-closed file, Sarah entered with 2 cups of coffee. Still brooding? She asked, setting 1 cup on his desk. Liam smiled faintly, just thinking about how fragile it all is. Trust, love, family. It takes years to build, but only moments to destroy. Sarah nodded, taking the seat across from him. But you helped them find some of that trust again. Matteo's safe because of you. Liam shook his head. Matteo's safe because of the truth. As ugly as it was, it needed to come out. And maybe, just maybe, that truth will help them heal. Epilogue. A mother's promise. Months later, Victoria stood in Matteo's bedroom, watching him sleep. The soft glow of a nightlight bathed the room in a warm light. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his face, her heart swelling with a mix of love and sorrow. I promise, she whispered. I'll always protect you. No one will ever hurt you again. As she turned off the light and closed the door, Victoria knew the road ahead would be hard. But for Matteo, she would walk it without hesitation. He was her son, her strength, and her reason to keep going. And that was enough. Victoria Ortiz stood in her empty kitchen, staring at the reflection of the dim light above her head in the polished granite countertop. Matteo was finally asleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully after weeks of tension and turmoil. The house, once filled with laughter and the routines of family life, now felt hollow. The betrayal of Gabriel, the manipulation of Elena, and the public scrutiny had stripped away the illusion of security she had clung to. She clutched the edge of the counter as tears spilled silently down her cheeks. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Gabriel's face, his regret, his excuses, his weakness, and Elena's venomous justification haunted her. They didn't deserve him. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Liam Carter. Final sentencing for Elena scheduled tomorrow. Let me know if you'd like to attend. Victoria hesitated. She wanted to move on, to leave the courtroom drama behind and focus on rebuilding her life with Matteo. But part of her needed to hear those final words, to see justice served, and to close this chapter for good. The final sentencing. The courtroom was packed the next day, the media frenzy around the case drawing crowds of onlookers and reporters. Elena Walker entered in handcuffs, her expression as impassive as ever. She scanned the room briefly, her gaze landing on Victoria for a fleeting moment. For the first time, a flicker of emotion passed over her face. Regret, anger, or sadness. Victoria couldn't tell. Gabriel was present as well, seated quietly to the side, his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to make himself invisible. Victoria avoided looking at him, focusing instead on the judge, who entered the room with a stern expression. "Elena Walker," the judge began, "your actions caused irreparable harm to the Ortiz family and endangered the life of a child. Your misguided sense of righteousness and manipulation led to a cascade of events that shattered trust and caused profound suffering. After reviewing the evidence and your testimony, this court sentences you to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole." A collective murmur ran through the room. Elena's face remained stoic, but her hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the defense table. As the court adjourned, Victoria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Justice had been served, but it was bittersweet. The wounds left by Elena and Gabriel's actions would take years to heal, and some might never fully fade. Gabriel's goodbye. Outside the courtroom, Gabriel approached Victoria cautiously, his eyes downcast. She stiffened, unsure if she could bear to face him, but he stopped a respectful distance away. "Victoria," he began, his voice cracking, "I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But I needed to say I'm sorry. For everything." She stared at him, her emotions warring within her. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers for the pain he had caused. But another part of her, a quieter, more exhausted part, just wanted to walk away and never look back. "You didn't just hurt me, Gabriel," she said finally, her voice cold and steady. "You hurt Mateo. You let him become collateral damage in your chaos. That's something I'll never forgive." Gabriel nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I understand," he whispered. "Take care of him. Give him the life I couldn't." Without another word, Victoria turned and walked away, holding her head high. Healing and moving forward. Months passed, and life slowly began to take on a new rhythm. Victoria moved to a smaller house in a quieter neighborhood, away from the prying eyes of the media and the ghosts of her past. She returned to work part-time, focusing on providing a stable environment for Mateo. Mateo, resilient as ever, began to thrive again. His laughter returned, filling the small house with hope. Victoria enrolled him in a daycare where he quickly made friends, his natural curiosity and warmth shining through. Liam Carter visited occasionally, checking in on them. Over time, the visits became less about the case and more about friendship. He admired Victoria's strength and her unwavering devotion to Mateo. She, in turn, appreciated his steadfast support and quiet understanding. One evening, as Liam prepared to leave after a visit, Victoria stopped him at the door. "Thank you, Detective," she said softly, "for everything." "Call me Liam," he replied with a smile. "And you don't need to thank me. You're the one who's made it through this." A mother's resolve. One night, as Victoria tucked Mateo into bed, he looked up at her with his wide, innocent eyes and asked, "Mama, are the bad people gone now?" She swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Yes, sweetheart, they're gone. You're safe now." He nodded sleepily, clutching his stuffed animal. "I love you, Mama." "I love you too, Mateo," she whispered, kissing his forehead. As she turned off the light and stood in the doorway, watching him drift off to sleep, Victoria felt a quiet sense of peace. The scars of the past would always be there, but they no longer defined her. She had survived, for Mateo's sake, and she would continue to fight for their future. Because no matter what, she was his mother, and that was enough. Epilogue. A new dawn. A year later, Victoria stood in a sunny park, watching Mateo run across the grass with his friends. The light breeze carried the sound of his laughter, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Victoria smiled without reservation. Liam approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her and joined her on the bench. "He looks happy," he said, nodding toward Matteo. "He is," Victoria replied. "And so am I." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in a warm golden glow, Victoria realized that while the past would always be a part of her, it no longer defined her. She had found strength in her pain, hope in her despair, and a future worth fighting for. And as Matteo's laughter echoed across the park, she knew they would be okay.